All right. So thank you all for joining us today for the webinar, 4 Strategies for Affecting Change in Government Agencies. We're happy to see you all here. We're grateful for your participation today. As we begin, a few housekeeping notes. All lines have been muted for today's presentation. Audience members can ask questions through the Q&A box. Please type your questions in the Q&A box. We'll pass those along to our presenter, Dr. Matthew Howell, as we get them and as time allows. Staff will be monitoring the regular chat box in case anyone has technical issues. Today's webinar is eligible for 1 UPPCC credit hour. To receive your certificate at the end of the hour, please email naspowebinars@naspo.org with your request. At the conclusion of today's webinar, you'll be asked to complete a few survey questions to provide feedback. We ask that you take just a couple of minutes to complete the survey so we can continually improve our program offerings. Our speaker today is Dr. Matthew Howell, Associate Professor of Government at Eastern Kentucky University. Dr. Howell grew up primarily in the suburbs of Kansas City and attended Southwest Missouri State, now Missouri State University, as an undergrad. He holds a Master's of Public Policy and a PhD in Public Administration from the University of Kentucky. Prior to his work as a professor, he experienced life in both state and city governments. At EKU, he teaches policy analysis and program evaluation in the MPA program, as well as American government, public policy, and urban politics at the undergraduate level, while continuing his research into metropolitan governments and network relationships. For the sake of full disclosure, Omar and myself have been pupils of Dr. Howell in the past, as well as several other members of our staff here at NASPO. We're very excited to learn from him here again. So welcome, Dr. Howell, and thank you for joining us.
Okay, well, it's great to be here. Thank you for that introduction. We're going to get started with the slideshow here in just a moment, but before we do that, 2 points I wanted to make. Number one, the presentation we're doing today is very much drawn from a class that is offered. It's that public policy and program evaluation class that Chadwick mentioned. And the text for it is actually this one. It's, oh, well, there we go, is James Q. Wilson's Bureaucracy. So if you would like to explore more about these concepts, this is definitely the book to get and put on your shelf and read. My copy is well loved, as you can tell. So that's kind of the first one. And the second one is that as it's coronavirus season, we're all working from home. So my office does double as my son's nursery. So if he has to come in for a diaper change or a change of clothes, we'll try to keep the interruption minimal, but just that's what'll happen. So it's a pleasure to be here. Again, I'm a professor at EKU in the MPA program online, and let's talk about how we deal with change which is being mandated from above, and what some strategies that we can use to deal with these types of issues. Okay. So we have 4 strategies for affecting change in government agencies. Let's talk about what that actually means. You've had a difficult change to make. Maybe the coronavirus is affecting your tax base. Maybe it's affecting the number of suppliers you can deal with. Suppliers are closing down, or they're being backlogged, or who knows. You've got some change which is happening, coming from below, some difficulty with your client base, some difficulty with your suppliers. Maybe it's coming from above. Maybe it's your legislator or your executive who is saying, hey, we have some difficult decisions we have to make. How do you respond to that? How do you handle that? We're going to talk about this from 3 different kind of perspectives. These are our learning objectives and our questions for investigation. The first one is, what do we do before the change is actually made? And that depends on your relationship with your policy network. We're going to talk about what the policy network is. We're going to talk about how you can understand your place in it and how you can use your place in the policy network to affect the change that actually gets made. Once the change is made, We're then going to talk about what strategies you can use to implement this and get the policy changes to be successful in your agency, how you can talk to people within your own agency, and how you can serve as the go-between or the interactor between the executive and legislator above you and maybe your managers or line employees beneath you. And then after the change has been made, how do you make it successful long-term? How do you get this to be a continuous process that changes up your agency? And that's going to require getting buy-in from your staff and from your clients and your partner agencies. And so we'll talk about how to do that, how to get that buy-in, and how to make this a long-term change and not a, as one of my old bosses used to say, a very nice meeting that we never do anything about. So let's start with understanding the policy network, right? What do we do before the change is made? That requires us to understand our policy network. Policy network. We often think of the things that go into a policy as being unrelated to each other, but they're actually not. They're actually part of a system that affects the way your agency operates, the institutions that govern your agency, the relationships that govern your agency. All of these things combine in ways to create policy outcomes, right? So what are some of the things that matter? It's easy to think about our actors. We know that the actors are important, but who are the actors we're talking about, right? I like to think of actors as stakeholders. That's really what you're thinking about when you're talking about who are the people involved in your policy area. Who are the people who affect procurement? So this is people who can change the policy. This is people who can inform the policy. This is people who are affected by the policy, right? All of these people are going to have very good information, and they're going to be able to do something to affect the final outcome of the policy. They might not be able to dictate the policy, but they can affect the final policy and what it's going to look like. The second thing that goes into your policy network is going to be your money and your resources. What do you need to carry out your job, right? This is not just money. Money is a big part of it. It's not just money, though. It's also things like, do you need certain computer software? Do you need capital equipment, trucks or cars or things like that coming from a specific place, right? All of those resources, who has them? And how is that going to be allocated? What's the decision-making process for deciding who gets money, who gets this software, who gets to buy new IT equipment? All of that stuff, that's important too. You have to understand where that fits into your network. The third component is power. Power, who has legal authority to do things. And we talk about two types of power here. We talk about what's called the power over, and we talk about the power to. Power to is a little easier to understand. Power to is, what do you have the power to do, right? What is it within your power to just go do? You don't have to ask permission. You don't need a say-so. You don't need a green light. You don't need a signature, nothing. You just go do it. What do you have the power to do? Power over is, what type of power do you have where you can stop something, right? Similarly, when you're dealing with other people, what power to do they have? What can they do without needing permission? And what power over do they have with you? What can they stop you from doing? Do you need their permission to do something? That's power over. They have power over you because they have a signature requirement, right? So that's power over, power to. Who has power to do things you need done? Who has the power over stopping you from doing the things that need to be done? And then finally, you have your voters or your clientele, right? The voters are the people who ultimately give us authority to do things. You might not be interacting with them directly, but they are important. But the clientele is the particular subset of citizens and organizations which are affected by your organization. So these are your suppliers. These are the people who you are procuring things for. This is the other agencies which work with you, right? Those are all part of your clientele. Who do you serve, and what do they benefit from your activities? Now, once you think about these four parts of the policy network, what you need to understand is how they work together and how they interact to make a policy happen, right? So that power and that money, those are held by actors. What do those actors do? Do those actors like you? Do those actors not like you? Do they have a reason to work with you? Do they have a reason to help you? You need to understand how you relate to the other people who are necessary to make a policy happen. The classic example of this is a garbage collection system, which is not exactly procurement, but we can work with it. It's easy to forget that you actually do need garbage truck drivers to drive the trucks, right? So that's actually an actor with an important resource, the truck drivers. And they have power over you, because if all the truck drivers refuse to drive the trucks, you can't collect garbage, right? So you have to think about those actors and their power and their money and how you can get them to help you, right? You might be able to do that because you have certain leverage that you can use. If you are an organization that's allowed to self-fund, you can raise your own revenue rather than relying on a legislature to give it to you. That gives you power because you have money. And if you have money, that means that you can go to other agencies and you can say, hey, we have some resources over here. We can do this thing. That's our power too. And it can benefit you, which means we need your resources to make this happen, right? And that might come in the form of clientele support. They go to the legislature and lobby on your behalf. That might come in the form of power. Maybe it's someone you need a signature from. Hey, go to this person, they give us authorization. If you give us that authorization, this is what we will provide to you because we have the power to do that, right? I want to be clear on this. I'm going to make this point a couple of times. This is, as Wilson describes it, very political behavior, but it's not partisan behavior. This is just straightforward. We have a limited number of resources and we have to decide how we're going to allocate them. That means you have to go talk to other agencies. You have to talk to the legislature. It's the whole reason we have liaisons. You need to use those liaisons to build this policy process. It doesn't happen in isolation. You don't just sit in your office and magically stuff comes together. You have to get out and you have to do that work. So as you're getting ready to go out and do that FaceTime, go talk to people, go negotiate, go work, go figure out what it is that you can do for them and what they can do for you to make your procurement office work better. Before we make a change, you need to know what your agency does. You need to think about your agency and you need to think about what is most important to your agency in terms of what you do and in terms of what you cannot do, right? And you got to be brutally honest about this. You can get into so much trouble if you say, oh yeah, we can do anything, because you can't. Organizations are built to do specific things. What is the specific thing you do? If you try to do something that you're not good at, it's going to be a mess. And that's going to cause you problems later because your organization not succeeding at what it says it's able to do is going to make people trust you. It's going to reduce your leverage. It's going to reduce your ability to work with the legislature, work with your partner agencies, work with your clients, work with your customers. It's going to be a lot harder to get them to trust you if you make promises that you can't fulfill. So you got to be brutally honest about this. What do you do? The classic case study here is the Social Security Administration. The Social Security Administration cuts checks. That is what they do. They are very, very efficient at cutting checks. Social Security is an easy program to administer. You check birth dates and Social Security numbers, make sure the person is old enough to receive benefits. You check their FICA statements, determine what their level of benefits is, and cut the checks. They are extraordinarily good at that. At one point in time, they were the most efficient agency of the government because they were really good at that. And then someone gave them the job of also doing Social Security supplemental insurance, which is not about checking records and it's not about cutting checks. It's about establishing whether or not someone has been disabled, which is a completely different task. Now, the Social Security Administration knew that they did not know how to do this. They told Congress that they did not know how to do this, and Congress ignored them. That does happen. And they got the job anyway. And it was a mess. They were not good at figuring out who was disabled. So they ultimately had to create a new wing, contract it out to other people, and find someone who had that task, had that organizational ability, because they didn't, right? You don't want to be in that position voluntarily. Know what you do. All right, once you know what you do, you need to assess what's called turf. What is your turf here? So what you do, who are you dependent on to do it? So are there other people who have to do things before you can do your job? Right? What is that resource dependency? Right? Is your fate shared with another agency? Is there some other agency that you float and sync together? One of the examples given here in Wilson is the DEA and the FBI, which did not like this. They actually they were jointed together to fight the drug war. And the FBI and the DEA did not get along, and they did not like the fact that they had to rely on each other for resources, and they did not like the fact that they would float or sink together because they were different agencies with different tasks. And so they asked the Congress to please separate them, and they ultimately were. They were actually separated so that they no longer were linked, right? Do you have an agency like that that you are forced to work with in order to do your job? And do you have the ability to make decisions on your own, or do you have to get permission to make decisions, right? How much power, how much authority do you really have, right? Once you've gotten a sense of what your turf is, what is the area in which you can act? What's your capability? What can you do well? Can you use that to do stuff, right? What do you not do? Is there things that you could do, but you'd need someone's help to do it, or you would need some other resource to do it, or you would need to expand to do it, right? Think about those things. What do you have the ability to do yourself? What do you need assistance for, right? And then finally, assess your place in the network. How many other people have to check your work before you can make decisions? If you have a lot of ability to make decisions without other people, that means you have a lot more power to work with. That means you have a tool that you can use in this negotiation about what is the change going to be, all right? Once you've done this, let's then talk about how you affect the policy. Wilson says there's a multiple step process here. You need to control your turf. Look at your agency. What is it? What resources does it have? What can it do? And don't lose that. This is important. Don't lose that. Don't give up the ability to do your job, because the ability to do your job is your tool that you are going to use to get the legislature or to get your client agencies to let you do the things you need to do, right? Start negotiating early. It is a lot easier to affect changes early in the process than late in the process, because late in the process, people have already brought forward resources. You've already got actors, you've already got money, you've already got power that have already been organized. And you're coming in and saying, hey, I need to blow up that arrangement and you need to accommodate my needs. That's a really hard thing to do. But if you're in early, you can say, hey, this is a thing we can do. Or if you give us these resources, these are things that we can do. And now you're part of that policy, which is being put together. And the latecomers, they're the ones who are having to say, hey, we want to blow up this deal and create a new policy, right? So control your turf, negotiate early. Big recommendations to seek autonomy. Look for things that you can put into your own hands, that you can have your fate in your own hands. Don't be linked to other people. Don't have a resource dependency. We're talking about needing efficiency. Here's an efficiency argument. Right now, we have to ask another agency for something in order to do the job that you've just given us. Why don't you take that requirement away from us? We can do our jobs more efficiently. We can cost you less money if you just let us make that decision on our own. Just give us more autonomy and we can do it. You might have to make some other promises too. We'll give you a report. Make sure we're not overstepping our bounds, right? But you are in an early negotiation stage in the policy, and you can actually affect the policy you're going to have to implement and make the policy better. Make it fit better with your existing agency, your existing resources, your existing dependencies, your existing clients. Which brings us to the next step. Maintain your clients. The strongest support a support agency has, that's a terrible sentence. The strongest allies a support agency has are the people who they support, the people they help. You go up to the legislature, you go up to the governor, you go up to a budgeting agency, and you say, hey, these are all the people we've helped. And they say, yeah, they've been very helpful to us. They've let us do things we couldn't do otherwise. And because of that, we need you to help them. You help them, that helps us, right? And you build this network of clients and supporters who will back you up when you're trying to make changes that benefit your agency. And finally, remember to offer value. If you're not offering value, your clients and your partner agencies are not going to work with you. If they don't see value in what you do, even if you are doing your job, if they don't see you being supportive and beneficial to them, they're not going to stick their necks out for you when they're trying to fend off budget cuts themselves, right? So that's what you can do early on in the process. And at this point, we're going to go ahead and pause for some questions.
All right, so I have a question coming in. How is relationship building different with political officials than it is with, say, elected bodies as a whole or other government agencies?
Sure. Prior to the coronavirus, I talked to local government officials about this, and they said FaceTime was just critical, that you have to get face to face with other people. You have to get face to face and talk to them. They have to know you to help you. That's true both of the client agencies, but also of legislatures or governors. Um, and if you're dealing with an individual, with a single person, you get that, you build that relationship, you maintain that communication, and they help you out later. When you're dealing with a whole organization, and when you don't have that ability to kind of FaceTime with a single person who can help you, it gets to be harder, because now you're talking about trying to build coalitions. You're trying to build one legislator at a time or one undersecretary at a time, trying to build this coalition that will support you. And that's just a lot harder to do. It's still going to involve a lot of FaceTime. It's still going to involve a lot of one-on-one meetings, but you're going to have to start trying to think, what can I do that benefits the entire organization I'm trying to communicate with? So it's no longer, hey, agency, we do good work for you. Would you please back us up on this? It's now, hey, agency, we do good work for you, and also we do good work for these other agencies, and would you all come together? It's a lot harder to get multiple actors together to do it. It's not impossible, but it does require a lot of energy and a lot of work kind of communicating both with individuals and then with the organizations as a whole to figure out what benefits the organization and will cause the organization to put pressure on the individuals to make the decisions that help you. All right, so we're moving now into kind of the key part. The 4 strategies is in this next part. How do you actually implement? You've talked to the legislature and the legislature's made a decision. Maybe that decision was crafted in working with you. Maybe that decision ignored you completely, but now you've got to follow it. What do you do? The first thing to keep in mind is that how you respond to this is going to depend in part on what type of agency you have, how your agency works. And in particular, it's going to depend on what we call your outcomes and your outputs. So this is a subtle distinction, but it's an important one. Your outcomes are what you actually achieve in the world, right? So the goal of your agency is to achieve some state of the world. That's your outcome. That's what you do. Your outputs are simply your day-to-day activities, your procedural activities. They are the things that you produce that you could send somewhere, right? So for a police officer, this is the common example. The outcome is lowering the crime rate, maintaining public order, making a city a nice place to live. But that's not actually what the police officer spends most of their time doing. Most of the time is doing paperwork. That paperwork is the output, right? That's the distinction. The paperwork is the output. And depending on the type of agency you're in, your outputs or your outcomes might be more or less visible. For our purposes, I think the ones we most care about are probably what are called production organizations, craft organizations, or procedural organizations. I don't think any of you are so unfortunate as to be coping organizations. But what we mean when we say an organization is a production organization, what we mean is that their outcomes and their outputs are both visible to policymakers and to people who are outside the organization. Common example of this is something like the Department of Motor Vehicles, where the outcomes are fairly visible. How many licenses get printed? How much money does the Department of Motor Vehicles bring in from licensing fees? And the outputs are likewise pretty visible. How many customers or how many clients cycle through every day? How many licenses does each clerk do in an hour? These types of things are also visible. Because of this, production organizations have a very easy time arguing to the legislature that they produce value because the outcome is visible. And they can also demonstrate that they are doing so in an efficient way because the outputs are visible. This does have a downside if you are a public agency who's also a production agency, which is that if your outcomes and your outputs are both very easily measured and very visible, it's also a prime candidate for being contracted out. So that is one downside from the public sector perspective of a production organization. But so long as the government wants to keep it as a government function, they have a very easy time arguing that they are doing the best they can and that they are providing value and doing good work. A lot of procurement offices might be in that position. If you feel like you have a good way to show that your procurement processes are saving the state money and are producing value, you're a production organization, right? But from my read of the manual, which, by the way, thanks to the NASPO guys for sending me that, it was fascinating reading over the last couple of weeks. I think most procurement agencies are probably procedural. It's big emphasis on following procedure, anti-corruption rules, anti-nepotism rules, making sure that you don't have people getting contracts in when they shouldn't, making sure that nobody has an advantage over anybody else, and not a whole lot on measuring whether or not the agency is saving money. The focus is on the procedures, which I think makes it a procedural organization. I could also see it as being a craft organization, which is kind of the reverse. In a craft organization, the outcomes are easy to see, the outputs not so much. Right? We can, if you think that that is your agency, that you can demonstrate value, but you're a little bit unsure about showing that you followed all the procedures, dotted all the I's, crossed all the T's, you might be a craft organization. But I think most of you are probably procedural or production organizations. And procedural organizations have the problem, which is that they can't easily show their value. What they can show is that they followed procedure, which means that procedure can get elevated to the most important thing. We're going to follow procedure, whether it's serving our clients or not. We're going to follow our procedures, whether it's providing value or not, because the most important thing is to not violate procedures, because if we violate procedures, people will get mad at us. Wilson calls that scandal. And scandal is bad for procedural organizations, because if all you can show is that you're following procedures and you have a big scandal of people violating procedures, you have nothing else to fall back on. You have no way to say, okay, all right, some T's didn't get crossed, some I's didn't get dotted, but we are still providing value to agencies. Now, this is where having a client base can help you, because your client base at least has opinions on whether or not you're creating value. They at least have an opinion on your outcomes. One of the examples that Wilson gives here was the Forest Service, which had this mystique of being a very important, very impressive agency that maintained the forests of the United States for agricultural use. And no one really questioned what they did, because it was this elite cadre of foresters. Then there was a wildfire in Montana and a bunch of forest firefighters died. And then suddenly everybody had, that's a scandal, right? These boys shouldn't have been killed in a forest fire. That's scandal. Now Congress is asking questions. What the Forest Service was able to do was say, look, okay, we'll revise the procedures. We'll make sure this doesn't happen again. But here, I want you to talk to our clients. I want you to talk to the states. I want you to talk to the loggers. I want you to talk to the foresters and have them talk about all the value we provide, right? And that saved them. They did not get roped back into Interior. They did not get eliminated as an organization. So again, building up that client base as a procedural organization will make it easier for you to show your value. And that's going to give you some options when it comes to how you implement. So let's talk about implementing and the 4 strategies. So the 4 strategies. First key thing, none of these strategies is better than any other. All these strategies can work. All these strategies can fail. The key thing is you have to tie it up to what type of organization you have, and you have to tie it up to what kind of person you are. What do you feel comfortable doing personally? This is not I can tell you from the outside what type of strategy you can pursue. I can tell you these are the options, and you have to kind of look at yourself, be brutally honest. What is my position? What is my personality? What can I do? The first strategy, Wilson calls the advocate strategy. The advocate goes into an organization with a lot of outside support, And what the advocate does is demonstrates loyalty to the purpose of the organization and to the goals of the organization and the programs by arguing that the task that the organization has been given can best be done in this way. So the government, the elected officials have given you a mandate that you have to change. And you advocate for your agency to your superiors, to your oversight, and you say, the best way for me to do this is to do the stuff that my organization does. That is the best way for me to achieve your ends, because I am loyal to the outcomes and I am loyal to the goals and the purpose of this organization. And I am telling you the best way to do it is this. You do the same thing to the organization. You go in from the oversight and you say, look, this is what they want us to do. And I am here to tell you that this is actually a good idea, that this is actually something that our organization can do successfully and our organization can be good with, right? And you've got that big outside support. And the nice thing about that big outside support is it means that it gives you some power. People are backing you up when you say, this is the best way to do it. So maybe there's some people in your oversight, maybe some of your client organizations, maybe some of your partner agencies don't like the decisions you have to make. But because you have that outside support, you're able to say, this is what we have to do, and this is the best way to do it. And you'll have other people backing you up to help bring everybody in line, keep that coalition, keep that policy network together, and make a policy goal happen, right? So that's the advocate. The downside of the advocate position is that as long as you have that strong outside support, you can whip people into line, you can whip people into shape, you can make big decisions, and you can have people help you and force people to do what you want. You have that power over because you have that outside support that you can call on. But when that outside support goes away, you are up a creek. Because when you no longer have that person who you can call in and say, hey, this is my outside support, and they say you have to do this, when that goes away, you're back down to just whatever power you had, right? You are borrowing power when you're an advocate. And if that power goes away, you're out of luck. So maybe the next strategy you want to try is the decider. And the decider model relies very heavily on high inside support. You come in and you have a vision for what you want your office to do. How do you want procurement to happen? Now, it's important that this is a narrow vision, because if it's too broad of a vision, you're not going to be able to make it happen, right? It's got to be something that this is what you want to do. This is what we're going to achieve, something specific. We are going to centralize procurement. We're going to automate some of our contract clause databases, right? Specific vision. This is what we're going to do. And then you work and you reorganize and you organize to achieve that vision. Move people into the right places to make your vision happen. Get the resources you need to make those that vision happen. The people who support that vision, promote them. The people who don't support that vision, they stay where they are. Right? I used to talk to the city manager of Bowling Green. He said and he's retired now, but this is about 10 years ago. This is actually when how many recessions have we had? The 2008 recession. This is during that one. And he said, this is the time to make those decisions about who needs to be on the bus and who needs to be under the bus. And he said, this is what I do as I'm managing my city, is the people who are most valuable at achieving the vision we have, they go on the bus. The people who are the biggest obstacles, they go off the bus, right? And again, this works great if you've got the internal support. If people buy into your vision, if people look at your vision and they say, this is what I see our office being in the future and I want to work towards that, this works great. You'll actually have a minimal number of people who you need to leave in place or get off the bus, because people will buy into the vision and they will follow you and they will work to make this organization do what it needs to do to achieve that outside goal, right? If you don't have that internal support, you're going to drive morale into the ground. Your workers are going to hate every minute to come into work. They're not going to want to do it. They're not going to want to work with you. They're not going to want to do their jobs. It can kill an agency. This is a very high risk strategy if you don't have that inside support. So maybe you want to try a lighter touch, This is the budget cutter take, or the negotiator. We're going to start with the budget cutter. Remember back at the beginning, I said, think about how autonomous your agency is. How much ability do you have to make decisions that don't require someone else to check on you? Well, the legislature is making a big change. Your governor is making a big change. Your political leadership is making a big change. This is the time to go and say, okay, I want to achieve that big goal. You have told me that this is what we need to do. I want to achieve that goal. Here's the problem. I can't do that the way the organization is currently set up. So what I'm going to tell you is this. I want you to give me more power But in return, so give me more autonomy, make me less dependent on other agencies, make me less dependent on you. But in return, here's what I'm going to give you. I'm going to give you more efficiency, and I'm going to give you better outcomes, because I'm no longer going to have to be doing all that rigmarole of working with other agencies, right? Now, I'm still going to work with other agencies. As procurement officers, that's what you do. You're still going to work with other agencies, but it's going to be more about you controlling your part and them controlling their part, right? And because of that, you are going to be able to be more efficient, and you're going to be able to run your organization more the way you want to. Now, the upside of this is that most of the time, this is a pretty good deal. You get more autonomy, you get more ability to work with your partners the way you want to, rather than the way someone else wants you to. And it allows you to produce a stronger agency, which is going to be more able to function, right? The downside of it is often the outside support, your clients are not going to like it, right? You are taking power back from your clients. You are taking power back from your partner agencies, and they're not going to like that. They're going to be very upset about that, and they're going to fight you on it. Now, you're not necessarily going to lose this fight. Again, legislatures like budget cutters. They really do. That is your trump card there. But that also means that if you are heavily dependent on other people, this can be a dangerous strategy to work with, right? And then finally, you've got the negotiator. The negotiator is another kind of soft touch strategy for dealing with change, which is where you serve as a middleman for constituencies, right? So you have multiple agencies that you work with, and they all want different things. All of them want you to do different things for them. You can't satisfy all of their needs. So what you do is you say, hey, look, I am happy to do whatever works for everyone. So why don't you all come over and we'll sit and we'll talk and we'll get face to face, and we will work out something that works for everybody, right? Now, again, this is something you got to be narrow on. You can't solve everybody's problems. Some problems might even be intractable. But what you can do is you can figure out kind of the big thing. This mandate has come down. We need to implement that. So let's get everyone together and let's figure out how we're going to do that. And as the middleman, you have actually a lot of power here. You may not feel like you have a lot of power, but you have a lot of power. Everybody is going to be pitching ideas to you, which means that they're going to be responding to what you say back to them. Now, yeah, okay, you can abuse this power. I study networks. You can abuse this power. You can say, yeah, I'm just not going to pass that message on. I don't recommend that, because if an agency finds out you've been playing them, they are going to be very mad, and they're going to go complain to your political leadership. So play straight with everybody, but it means that you get first dibs at creative solutions, right? So every agency is like, this is what we need. This is what we need. And then you can say, and if we do it this way, it benefits all the agencies. They all benefit. They all go to the legislature and they lobby on my behalf. And it also benefits our office because it lets us do this thing we need to do, right? That's the strength of the negotiating strategy, right? Now, it also has a downside, which is that it relies on the agreement of all those external partners. If they hate each other, if you work out an agreement and then you go to all of the agencies and all of your clients and you work with them and they say just flat out, no, we will not work with each other, you're out of luck. Because this thing relies on your ability to be creative and to create solutions that benefit everybody, that everybody can agree to. And if you don't get that agreement, you don't have the ability to go to the legislature as a group and say, here is our solution, here is how we're going to implement. You don't have the ability to go to the governor and say, here is our solution, here's how we're going to implement, and have that strength of numbers to convince the governor that, yeah, actually, this is a good plan, let's do it, right? And so that's the 4 strategies. And again, let's go ahead and pause for a little bit and take some questions.
All right, so we have a question come in. Could you give us an example or two of some common mistakes that officials have made when using some of these approaches?
Sure. Yeah, let's go back to the slide. The 2 number 1 mistakes that people make. Number 1 is getting drunk on power, is thinking that you have more power than you do and trying to force the issue. Again, as a manager or an executive in procurement, you are a political actor. I don't mean a partisan one. Maybe you are, maybe you aren't. Maybe your selection process is partisan, maybe it's not. But from a administrative standpoint, you are engaging in politics, the decision of how we're going to allocate resources across a society. If you get too aggressive, if you think that you just have all the power and you can do whatever you want, you're going to discover very quickly that you need friends. One of the pieces of advice I was given when I first started working in government, he said, great guy, is a tech policy advisor in the office I was working in. He said, look, every knife you stick in someone's back, someone's going to stick a knife in your back. And he said, just don't do it. It's not a good way to do it. And you see this a lot. Wilson talks about this in some of his case studies. People who, they got a little bit drunk on power. They started out as an advocate, and they confused advocating the goals and mission of the organization. He talks in particular about Robert McNamara. Wilson talks specifically about Robert McNamara and says that McNamara at the Defense Department was a very hard-driving advocate and decider model. Those are the two models that he used. And eventually he got to the point where he started thinking that he could actually just run the Defense Department. And then the Vietnam War happened, and he kind of discovered that no, actually, he could not just run the Defense Department. He needed people in the Defense Department to help him and work with him. And he became a highly ineffective Secretary of Defense and resigned. He just had to give up. He'd been effectively chased out of the office by everybody hating him, right? That's the first one. Get drunk on power. You got to maintain your support with your clients and with your organization. If you alienate everybody, you're just going to get screwed. That's just the way it works. The second major mistake that I see people do with all of these models is hold on. Sorry, let me bring up my my notes just a little bit here. Right. Is trying to do a strategy that they don't feel comfortable with themselves. Again, this is highly personal. This is dependent on what you feel comfortable doing. If you don't like negotiating, if you don't feel like you are able to create package deals that people can agree to, that's not a good strategy for you, right? And you should try a different strategy. Sometimes people feel like, well, but I've got to do a negotiated strategy. It's the only choice I've got. Look for help then. If you feel like it really is the only thing you can do, look for help. Find help and get someone to help you do it. When I worked in the city of Paducah, that was how they dealt with a lot of problems. They would bring in a specific person to negotiate a specific problem because the city manager didn't feel like him negotiating actually helped. He felt like it actually just kind of pissed people off because everybody would feel like he was against them, right? So get an outsider to come in and do that work. Again, you've got to be brutally honest with yourself. What can you do to make this work? And if I think of other kind of common mistakes, I will be sure to let you know, but those are the big two. Doing something you're not good at and trying to do something that you don't have the ability to do, right? Don't getting too powerful. Now, what other questions do we have? I know I've seen a couple pop up in the box.
So, is there a way to keep the process going without being dependent on one charming person?
Mm-hmm. Ideally, you don't want to be dependent on one charming person at all. Now, this does require you to do a lot of work yourself. But hopefully it's not dependent on you being charming. It's dependent on your organization providing value, right? You are representing your organization, and if you got hit by a bus, someone could step into your shoes and they could represent the organization as well. That's kind of our big hope. Certain personal characteristics do matter. So if a different executive or different manager is taking over, they might shift from a negotiator to a decider strategy because that works better for their personality. But the basic nature of the organization is still going to determine a lot of this, right? The decider and the negotiator are both looking for a vision of what the organization is going to look like and what the organization is going to do. That's the personal part. What is the vision? What is the way we're going to try to achieve that vision? But the organization itself, what you do, what benefits you provide, that's going to constrain your actions quite a bit. So a new decider is still probably going to be chasing a very similar vision. A new negotiator is probably going to still be chasing a very similar vision. So again, it shouldn't be dependent on one person being highly charming. However, I will say a single person being highly charming is really helpful. One of the people we talked to in local government, another one of the people Wilson talks about in his case studies, they all comment that if you've got a person who's just super personable and people just like to work with them, they just like to do what they want, that is a great person to have on staff because they make your life so much easier. But you shouldn't rely on that because, again, they could get hit by a bus. All right. We're almost to the end, so let's go ahead and finish up, and then we'll just take as many questions as we have time for in the last couple minutes. So you've made your decision on how to implement. You've had the decision made for you. You've decided to implement in a certain way. What strategy you're going to use to implement? Are you going to negotiate? Are you going to create a policy that's a blend of all your different clients? Are you going to create a policy or a procedure that is based on getting to a certain vision? Are you going to advocate? Are you going to budget cut? How are you going to respond to this? You've made that decision. Now you got to get everybody in your agency to work with you. And we have a lot of good advice on how not to do this. My favorite of which really is this first one, which comes from Elliot Richardson, who was the director of health, education, and welfare under Nixon, who said that his experience as the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare made him really appreciate Fidel Castro's ability to get a speech, to give a speech. And he said, you wish this worked. You really do wish it worked. You go into one office, you say, the decision has been made, it's been handed down, here's how we're going to do it. I'm just going to give a big speech, and everybody's going to do it. That's not going to work. That doesn't work. First off, it's logistically difficult. Even in the era before coronavirus, you're not giving a Castro speech, you're giving a dozen Castro speeches. But second off, even if you can talk to everybody, people aren't going to respond to just a single speech. In fact, this is the problem with all of these things that don't work, is that they are effectively Band-Aid approaches to making change. A training seminar doesn't work. You give people a training seminar once a year, they do it, they check it off the box, and then they go back and do their real job, right? And you'll notice the problem with that disconnect is that people are doing their training, and then they're thinking, and now I'm going to go back and do my real job, which means the training is not affecting their job. Their work is not affected by the training. So the training seminar itself doesn't work. It's not enough. You got to do more than that. Similarly, merit pay and bonuses do not work. First off, in the public sector, most people are not motivated by money that much. People are motivated by money. Don't get me wrong. You know, don't go cut out all of your employees' work. You'll discover if you stop paying them that they stop working. But that's not the only reason they do this. They do it because they feel a connection to public service. They do it because they feel like they're good at it. They do it because they enjoy having the power to make these kinds of decisions. People have lots of reasons that they do work in the public sector. Money is not the most important. I have whole literatures on this idea of public service motivation and why do people work in the public sector. It's not just the money. So offering people money to make policy changes is not going to work because it's not really motivating them as much as other approaches will. So if it's not the easy stuff, if it's not give a big speech, do a once a year training seminar, or pay people to follow your policy, how do you get the people to buy in and modify their behavior? Well, you've got to do organizational change. Your organization is built to do something. Remember back in the beginning, we said you've got to be aware of what it is you do. You've got to know yourself very well. Your organization is built to do something. What is that task? Is that task overseeing contracts? Is that task negotiation? Is that task reading bids, putting out calls for proposal and judging them? What is that task? Figure out what that task is and then preserve that through this whole process, because here's where it matters. Because now you have to make a change in your organization and you have to ask, how can I go from where we are to what we need to do? And that means changing the organization to do that new task. So you need to integrate that change into everything you do all the time. What does it mean to do that? It means it's not a one-time training seminar. It's a thing you do every week. Why do police officers do their paperwork every day rather than at the end of the week? Because if they do it at the end of the week, they think of their job not as doing the paperwork and not as doing the oversight. They think of their job as going out and busting punks or whatever, right? So why do we put a briefing in a police officer's daily activities? Why do we put a do the paperwork reporting on your patrol at the end of the police officer's activities, because that is how you create an organizational change. And you go from police officers who think of their job as driving around and hassling people who are causing public order disturbances, or going around and arresting people who commit crimes, and we shift them instead to thinking about accountability and responsibility and working with their chiefs, right? You've got to integrate it into the daily tasks. What do you do every day? What do you do every week? And you've got to also inculcate this in the culture, which means who do you promote and who do you hire? If you're in the position where you get to make these decisions, you need to promote people who support the organization's mission, and that includes this change. You're not going to promote a whole bunch of people right off the bat, but it does mean that over time, as this change gets implemented, the people you praise, the people who you hold up as examples, the people who you ask to do the training seminars, the people who you ask to take up more authority positions, these people need to be the ones who are doing the change you want. Because if people see, aha, this is the way, doing this is the way to advance, this is the way to do my job, you will get that organizational change and you'll get that cultural change, right? If you don't do that kind of stuff, the culture's not going to change. You bring new people in, they're going to adapt the existing culture, right? Adopt the existing culture. They're not going to do what you tell them to do, because you tell them to do it once a year. And then they go and they hang out with all the people who work in the office, and they do what the other people they work with do, right? So a lot of you might be working in organizations that have a lot of what we call professionals. We're distinguished between professionals and bureaucrats. Professionals are people whose peers are not necessarily in the organization. So make changes as part of the routine, change the tasks, change the culture. That's internal. That's how do we change our organization so that people do within our organization what we want them to do, right? But if you've got a bunch of lawyers working for you, they don't necessarily look inside your organization for how they should behave. They look to the bar. They look to other lawyers for how do they do their jobs. If you've got accountants or MBAs, they don't necessarily look to the organization for their cues. They look to the broader society of accountants and broader society of people who have MBAs. So you want to pitch the change to them in language they understand. So you want to talk to your lawyers as legal professionals. You want to tell them, hey, this new thing that's coming down, we want you to look at the legal aspects of it, and we want you to see how we can do this, how we can enforce this, how we can make this change in a way which is consistent with legal practice. Because now you've triggered in their brain that, yeah, this is legal practice. This is my job. This is what I like to do. I want to do this well because I want to look good in front of other lawyers, right? And do the same thing with accountants. Here's an accounting task. I need you to figure out how to do it so we can achieve our goals using accounting principles. And they're like, yeah, this is accounting. This is going to make me look good in front of all the other accountants. That motivates them because they want to do their jobs. They want to do their jobs well, right? If you're really lucky, you're already doing some of this stuff, right? If you've been early on in the process and talking to the people making these decisions and they've incorporated your feedback into it, you're already going to be doing some of this. And you're going to be able to go to people and say, hey, this thing that you're doing already, do more of it, right? You're already in the habit of doing it. It's already routine. We're just making a small change to what you do every single day. But those small changes change the culture of the organization. And when the culture of the organization changes, that's how you get good, smooth implementation. And that's how these changes exist, permanently after even you're retired or out of office, right? And then final point, people who are good at the new tasks recognize their success in ways that are appropriate to your office, right? That's promotions, that's mentioning in the newsletter, that's praising them in public, that's asking them to go with you to a briefing or something like that, right? Recognize the people who are doing what you want well, and that will spread. Other people will start doing it as well. And with that's the presentation. To sum up, before the change is made, you need to understand your agency. You need to understand what you do. You need to talk to your legislature and your executive. You need to tailor the change that's going to happen to your tasks and trade off your weaknesses. Make sure the change that happens is a change that you are going to be good at handling. During the implementation itself, keep an eye on your constituency, maintain that value, and then use your constituency to support your implementation. Choose a strategy that works with your strengths and the constituency and the organization you have. And then after implementation, incorporate the change into the daily organizational life so that it's preserved in the organizational behavior and will continue going forward. With that, thank you all for your attention, and I'm happy to take what questions we have left.
All right, so we had a question come in. Mentioned the term culture or in reference to organizational culture many times in the presentation. Are there questions or exercises you use to kind of get a handle on an organization's culture? For example, like how tolerant they would be of failure or risk adversity, that sort of thing.
There might be. It's not the way I've learned how to look at it. What I've learned to look at and how I've done kind of cultural analysis is, and this comes from my being a network person. You go sit in the organization, you see who people talk to, you see who they take advice from, and you see who they give advice to. You look for the people who everyone looks at and says, that is who I want to go to if I have a question. And you see what those people do, and that's probably your culture. Because if the workers are looking at a specific person and saying, that is the person I want to ask for advice, that person is probably embodying the culture in such a way that everybody recognizes it, right? Other things you can look for, just look at what people do on a daily basis. One of my favorite stories about this came from working in a police department, not in any great fashion. I was seconded to it for a couple of days. But talking to police officers about how they view their job. And you get different answers from different police officers. Some police officers, notably what you will not hear is police officers talking about how their job is paperwork unless they're grousing about it. But police officers will talk about their job as keeping the peace, or they'll talk about their job as investigating crimes or arresting criminals. The things you hear back from how people conceive of their job will also give you some clues as to what the culture is, right? And so that's kind of the big two. Talk to people about how they view their jobs and see who they go to for advice and for help.
So could you give us an example of some of the best or most successful implementations you've seen using some of these strategies?
Let's see. Do I want to do ones I've seen personally, or do I want to do ones that have case studies on them? Let's start with ones that have case studies on them. So there's literature on this that you can go look at. Successful implementations are often using any of these things, but successful implementations are often narrow. Big changes are hard, and so narrow interventions are a lot easier, because if you do a narrow change. So, again, maybe a big change is coming down from on top. Look at that big change and identify what you think the most important part of it is, and focus on that first, right? So one of the examples that Wilson gives is, again, the Forest Service. The Forest Service wants a relatively small change. They want to be part of the Agriculture Department rather than part of the Interior Department, because as part of the Agriculture Department, they'll be more important. Because at the time, it was back in the 50s. At the time, the Agriculture Department was a bit more powerful, a bit more important of an agency. This is a small change. In fact, the guy who was doing it, the director who was doing it, talked up how small a change it was. It's just moving boxes around on the org chart, right? But once that box had moved, turns out that's actually a big change. Because then he had more power to do things like change up the procedures that the Forestry Service used. He had more ability to regulate directly on how forests were used. And that small change ended up having very big effects. If he'd started out with, I want big, massive regulatory changes, that's a lot harder. That's a lot harder negotiation to do. That's a lot more enemies if you're trying to advocate or decision make. That is a lot more resistance if you're trying to do budget cutting. Well, budget cutting wasn't even really an option because it was going to cost more money to do this. But a small change can give you opportunities to make bigger changes, right? And so that's kind of the strong advice I give is look for small changes. Now, in terms of what I've seen in person, again, when I worked in the city of Paducah, they were making some small changes to the police department, making small changes to the training department. And this is where I want to, again, emphasize that it's got to be a cultural change, not a one-time training seminar. Um, they had some money and some resources, so they wanted to train a SWAT team. They wanted a special weapons and tactics team to handle things like anti-terrorism. This is after 9/11. Handle anti-terrorism type issues, drug cases, riot control. They wanted this team, right? And they brought in an instructor from the state, from Kentucky State Patrol, to instruct them on how to do this. And I got to go observe. I got to go because I was seconded to the office. I got to go observe this training. And the trainer, he said, look, there's just a handful of rules, just a handful of rules. Thing number one is don't touch anyone unless you're trying to arrest them. Thing number two was don't arrest anyone unless you have to. Thing number three was that this is a dangerous job, and we try to make it safe, and we try to make it a life-saving organization. And he had some other rules that he talked about too. But the big important ones were don't touch anyone unless you're trying to arrest them, and don't arrest anyone unless you have to. It is far better to get people to surrender peacefully, or take their, if you're doing a riot control scenario, which is what we were practicing, take their picture and then go arrest them later, right? Spent all day on this, training the police officers how to do this. And then the trainer left, and I hung out with the police officers who were all like, yeah, nah, that's dumb, right? Because if we're in a riot control situation, we're going to go in sticks blazing and just punch people. It's like, it's one day training does not solve that, right? One day training does not solve that. It's multiple days of training. And one of the things I think really helped is that the first time they used the SWAT team, things went horribly wrong. I'm not going to tell the story because we're out of time, but things went horribly wrong, and the police chief got sacked for it. He got fired, just straight up. That sends the message, right? We're not kidding when we train you. And so that's kind of the implementation I've seen done successfully at the local level. Hold people responsible for day-to-day activities. Make sure the training is continuous. Make sure it's day-to-day activities. Promote the people who do it right. Don't promote the people who do it wrong. I'm not saying fire anyone. Like the police chief got fired. I'm not saying that was right or wrong, but it sent the message, right? And with that, I'm happy to keep taking questions, but we are, I believe, out of time.
So for those of you who do need to go, thank you for attending. Feel free, contact us at NASPO webinars at naspo.org for your UPPCC certificate hour and for the PowerPoint slides from this presentation. This presentation has been recorded and will be made available a little later. And for those of you with a few more minutes, we can continue to ask some questions for as long as Dr. Howell is willing to oblige us. But we want to thank you all for your participation today. So one question that came in, what advice would you have for someone who is new in their position and is wanting to build influence?
Yeah, so that's actually a great position to be in. It's both exciting and also dangerous. So if you're new, that means that you don't have a lot of baggage already to deal with. You're kind of the outside person. You can be the sheriff coming in to clean up the town, or you can be the hero coming in to save the organization. The upside of being from the outside coming in is that presumably you're a new hire or a new appointee, so you've got some power from outside sources, right? So that might incline you towards the advocate position. But the weakness is that you don't have those existing relationships already. So I would say start working on those relationships, because if you want to do the advocate thing, you're going to need to advocate to people. So start building a good relationship with them so that when you tell them, this is what I need, this is what I want to do, they listen to you. That would be kind of the first step, is just build those relationships. It does take time, so start now. My research is on local government officials, and a couple of years ago, I did a survey after an election, and I compared the outgoing elected officials to the incoming elected officials about 6 months after the election. Incoming people, they didn't know anyone. Normal local official, has a couple of people in other cities they talk to. The new people had nothing. It takes, my back of the envelope estimate, and it's only 8 years worth of survey. I'd like more because elections every 4 years. But it takes about a term to really get settled into the job. It takes about 2 to, it's the end of the second term when you actually have kind of a large network. The first term is learning how to build the network, and the second term is actually doing something with it. So start building those relationships now. You might not have 8 years. I imagine most of you probably don't have that long in the office. I imagine turnover is a fairly frequent thing, either moving to another office or moving to another state. So start the process now, because you need to build those relationships. You need to build those friends. You need to have those people ready to help you when you need them. The time to build your relationship is yesterday, not when you need them today. So that's the big one, is start working on those relationships as soon as you can. The second thing is, as a new person, learn your agency. It's always important. This job is always hard, and it's always information dependent. So learn your agency. Learn what they're good at, learn what they're bad at, learn what their procedures are, learn what their abilities are, what they like to do, what they hate to do, and use that information, right? Once you've got good information, you understand your agency very well, you're in a much better position to then take that institutional approach when you go talk to the legislature or talk to your partner agencies, and you can say, I can speak because I've been doing this and I know my job and I know my agency, I know my brief. I can tell you this is what we can do. I can make promises that I can fulfill. I can tell you no and have you believe that I cannot do it because I know my agency and you know that I know my agency. So that's kind of my big advice for new people. Get to know your agency and start building those relationships now.
Well, with that, thank you again, Dr. Matthew Howell. We appreciate your time speaking with us today. Thank you all for listening. As we wrap up, a few quick reminders. When this webinar closes, you'll be redirected to a short survey. Please take a few moments to complete this. It provides helpful feedback for us. For those of you who wish to receive a certificate towards one UPPCC credit hour, please email naspowebinars@naspo.org with your request. And finally, don't forget to look at naspo.org for information on upcoming webinars and the NASPO annual conference, as well as resources created for our members' use. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of the week.